All right, so like a lot of other ideas in Pokemon, there's a lot of ideas that get scrapped. So it's still kind of debatable, like what ideas are real and like which ones are still out there. Not necessarily fake, but just trying to figure out what its true intentions were. When they put a lot of these game cartridge, a lot of the information into the cartridges. It's just crazy to think how different Pokemon really would have been if they would have never had cartridge limitations to begin with. You know. So here's something for you that's really interesting. Okay, so I uploaded a video that was on this channel, and I want to confirm something. So if you actually go back to the Helix Chamber, I mean, they're basically the ones that kind of got this whole thing started, where like they found all this prototype data, but they had a cover story and they presented it incorrectly, where they basically stated that a lot of the information that they had. Now, the problem is a lot of people came out and they thought that it was all fake, and kind of for a good reason. But when you really start digging into it, you do start to realize that a lot of this content really is backed by the fact it was leaked from Game Freak servers. A lot of it actually came from the original, like the internal data of like the same games, and a lot of it was just scrapped because of cartridge limitations. Heck, even the game designers themselves originally confirmed that there was a lot that was real. Maybe the front sprites were just reinterpreted of like, the said 39 that we know of, but at the same time, no, most of those Pokemon probably were recycled at some point into later the series. Now, what Pokemon that is, it's debatable, but I've kind of made some good progress figuring out a lot of them, along with some other people. But here's something I want to consider, though. Okay, so if you actually, like, bear with me here with this, what we're going to talk about. There is, I guarantee you these answers are out there, but we're still looking for them, and I have no idea where they're at. But I'm sure maybe somebody, if you have this, please upload it to the internet. I'd really like to rip this apart a little bit more. So basically, there was a interview that Satoshi Tajiri, again, the man who created Pokemon, actually stated at one point that when Gen 1 was created, they had roughly 300 Pokemon designs. And this isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. So, man, that's a funny pun. Or pun intended, anyways. So, if you really dig into the internal data of Pokemon, they stated that when they settled on Gen 1, there was originally 191 Pokemon. They said it was originally 190, though. But if you count Mew replacing Omega, which if you don't know, here's something else that you probably didn't know about Pokemon. In Japan, there was what was known as Ultraman 7. And basically, if you're familiar with monster movies in Japan, like Godzilla and all that, Ultraman 7, they basically were like, these really large aliens that were kind of like robots, if I remember correctly. But they also, like, they were living organisms. And they were, like, kind of like, you can kind of see where the Power Rangers even came to be. Basically old monster movies as well as Ultraman 7 really kind of inspired Pokemon, because a lot of people were into the series, so it was huge in Japan, and that's kind of where one of the major reasons Satoshi Tajiri got some of the Pokemon ideas from, like Mecha Godzilla, which is what Omega was basically, but it was a Pokemon that was scrapped from the original games. So basically what happened was Mew replaced Omega. As a matter of fact, I think it was the very first Pokemon that they took out, because it was in index number 21. So Mew was saved in index 21. So if you count the original 190 plus Mew, that's 191. But as of right now, there's still 5 Pokemon that are missing that we still don't know about. Or maybe, I think maybe it might even be 8 if you don't want to count the fossil sprites, like the Ghost missing, no, the Kabutops fossil, as well as the Aerodactyl fossil as a placeholder. So that's basically like 8 missing, no, so that brings it down to something. Or maybe not. But at the same time, though, maybe not. Because if I remember correctly, there was a video I uploaded where there was like 186 Pokemon, and these were basically like some of the Pokemon we were able to recover, but there's still like tons of Pokemon that are missing. I think one of them is a baby Kangaskhan, but it's kind of hard to say because they managed to get a blurry image of it, and I think if you really stare at it close enough, you can kind of see the front and back sprite of it. And it really does look like a Cubone. which I wouldn't be surprised. I think the reason they scrapped it was because maybe Cubone it kind of looked like Cubone really was still a baby at that point, so how different it would have been, I wouldn't be surprised, but it's kind of a good analysis to go on, because if you really look at Cubone and the way it turns its head and it looks up like a baby Kangaskhan. I've already made a video about this if you want to hear my argument. You know, I'll send it to you if you want to hear your side of the story, if you want to tell me what you think. You know, but I'm convinced that maybe, you know, because if there was a Pokemon that was scrapped that Marowak evolved into, then I wouldn't be surprised that, you know, baby Kangaskhan could have been a Pokemon at one point, because, you know, you had other baby Pokemon like Vulpix, or the one that there was a pre-Ponyta at one point, and some of these Pokemon actually made it into Gen 2, believe it or not. So how many other Pokemon they scrapped and they were actually designed for maybe the prototype of Gen 2, and we'll get into that because that's a whole nother mess of data. But basically this is what we know though. So basically, looking at Gen 1, there was roughly 300 Pokemon designs that they had that were prototype data. But as it stands right now, we only know of 186 of them. Maybe 187 if you count the baby Kangaskhan. But what still gets me is if there's still 4 Pokemon that we don't know of, well, that brings it up to 191. So then you basically have like 108 all the way up till 299. Because here's where it gets interesting. You know, if you're watching the images in this video, and I know the audio is kind of out of sync. I'm going to go back and edit this after I'm done. But basically think of it like this. So Gen 1 had roughly 300 designs. Maybe 2, well, and then when Gen 2 came out, not just counting the final version of the games, because, you know, by the end of Gen 2, they basically settled on 100 new designs. Because the way Pokemon worked was you had the original Gen 1, which there was 151. That's what they had in the final version of the game. So Bulbasaur all the way up till Mew. And then Gen 2 started, you had Chikorita all the way up till Celebi in the final version. But they stated that in Gen 2, they had like hundreds of ideas that were literally scrapped. We're not talking just front, back sprites. We're talking shiny forms. And they even the shiny Pokemon were completely different at the time. And they were actually much stronger too. That was kind of a good indication that, you know, you were going to catch like a really strong Pokemon based on its stats and the whatnot. So basically the way it works is if they're DVs, I believe, because that's what they called it before. They called it effort values and individual values. Basically back in Gen 2, if it was over, if their attack, special, defense, I don't know, like all of them were like over 10 or something like that. You know, it was like a 1 in 64 chance of hitting a shiny. And realistically in the Space World demo, getting a shiny was actually a lot easier and more beneficial actually. So you could actually, like a shiny Pokemon was what you wanted if you could get one very closely at least. So that's pretty cool. But I also think, but what really got me interested was, I think it's crazy that somebody could come up with something like that versus initially what we were looking for. But what really impressed me was, you know, if people can actually find what those original 100 and, like, again, going back to Gen 1, like if we can find the index numbers for like 192 all the way up to 299, I mean, you would probably have filled in a void that a lot of people have been trying to find for a long time. And so I think right now that's probably like the most important thing that we should really keep an eye out for is more scrap Pokemon designs, you know, more ideas that originally were ideas, but maybe they just turned it into something else. I'm not really 100% sure if you want to say that a lot of the Gen 2 Pokemon could have very well have been some of the final version of Gen 2. I mean, I'll give you an example. Like you had Pokemon like Cyndaquil. That was eventually, like, Cyndaquil was there from the beginning. Even before the final version of the game, Cyndaquil wasn't really, like, it wasn't a fire type. It was actually a ground type, if I remember correctly. But the concept was there, though. You know, the concept art was a little bit different, and but it was a Pokemon. It was there from the beginning. I think there was even a beta Totodile, and it wasn't really it wasn't the water starter either. You know, it's all over the place. Like, then there's some people that are messaging me every now and again. Like, you know, you had, like, these Pokemon from Gen 1 that were called, like, I'm trying to remember what they were called. They were basically, like, a water dragon type, and Lance actually used them. So it's really interesting to think that, you know, and then if you look at them closely, it kind of looked like in the Space World demo, they took Aquas and Cruz, which was the water starter. And, you know, it was basically recycled into there, and then they took those Pokemon and then recycled them into, if my math is correct and it's true, you know, people are saying it's Sobel from the water starter from Gen 8, which is actually pretty interesting. You really see how they took, like, a lot of the ideas. If you dig into it, Pokemon, they recycled a lot of ideas they had from the past, and could have just been completely, answers could have been right in front of us this whole time, you know. Like Pokemon, like then you go back to Gen 1. But, you know, you look at, like, a lot of the ideas were just either delayed, scrapped altogether, or just recycled into something else. You know, but the thing is, that's the problem with, like, Gen 2 and Gen 1. A lot of ideas, they were there from the beginning, but they were scrapped because of cartridge limitations. So it does make you wonder, you know, what they could have had that could probably still be out there somewhere. Now, where they would have had these ideas, the only thing I can think of is maybe they have it saved in, like, a data vault, like, on their computers somewhere. Because, I mean, like, you know, you see, like, even, like, all these other security companies, or even, like, you know, these big companies like Nintendo, like, they back their stuff up. They have, like, a lot of stuff. But the problem is, though, when you leak this stuff, there's so many, like, source codes, for example, for, like, some of the games. There's so many, like, you have to find somebody who knows how to make sense of this stuff, because it's, again, sensible information. But it's like, you don't know, like, 100% like what that information is unless you can revert it somehow. And for me, I always thought it was really interesting, like, if you can dig into, like, if people are leaking this information, then I'm pretty sure somewhere out there they could leak the rest of that information if it's saved. Like, I mean, if you got, like, the index numbers, like, 300 all the way up to, like, I think it goes up to 448 or something like that. And it's even higher than that, probably. How many, like, you know, you start thinking, like, if somebody could make a game, and, you know, Game Freak's made tons of Pokemon games. If there are tons of games out there right now that have, like, all these ideas, all these beta content designs, and they get scrapped, how much more is out there right now that we haven't discovered? So, like, even just Gen 1 could have had, like, 300 ideas. We could have, like 151 Pokemon is a lot for a game. But what got me was, before they switched over, I think it was Crystal for the Game Boy Color, they basically, up until that point, it's like they were using integers up to 255, because if it went past that, the game would crash. But the thing was, though, at that point, they couldn't go past 255 as far as the Pokedex, because, I mean, unless they reprogrammed to something else. Again, I'm not a programmer, so I'm sure maybe there is a way, but it would have to require, like, you know, they'd write, like, 2 different sets or something like that. But anyways, but it's like, you know, the first 2 games, they already had, like, they had so many designs, and it's like, you know, they could have stored it in the game's programming somewhere, but at the same time, it's like, you know, can you really go over 255 as far as, like, the Pokedex itself without creating another one and then overlapping it? It's actually pretty interesting to think about, you know. But I just think it's remarkable how, you know, how they even created that series. You know, there's so many ideas that are scrapped, but it's like, if somebody was actually keeping track of, like, the illustration numbers, for example, then we could actually reverse engineer it if we can find the rest of the data. So what right now the missing nose would be, like, 192 all the way up to 299 if we're just looking at the first 300 designs. But where are the other 108 plus the 4 that we didn't have before? So it's either 112 or 113 that I'm thinking of right now. I think it's 112 plus the baby Kangaskhan, so that would be 113. But it just makes me wonder, though, you know, because it's like, a lot of the ideas they did use, and if you really, again, if you dig into it enough, you will, a lot of it makes sense, but a lot of it's still out there too, waiting to be discovered. And I'm thinking maybe somewhere at Nintendo or even Game Freak themselves, they probably know this information, but you know, what kind of information do we not have, you know? I think it's an answer that begs a question, and I want more people to really think about this, you know? More ideas means that we can kind of rationalize it, and we can kind of understand. We could build like a prototype that actually would have realistically looked like the games, you know? Somebody could have created a fan patch of it, but they took all the real assets of the game that were never in the final version that probably should have been. Like the one concept I always thought was really cool, if you really look at like some of the prototype maps in Gen 1, was that they moved Moltres from like the Cerulean Cave, or from Victory Road to the Cerulean Cave, and they took Mewtwo and they put it in the Sylph Tower. The Sylph, you know, the Sylph Tower that you went and fought Giovanni for the Master Ball after, you know, Giovanni and the Team Rockets. Because, you know, like if you think about it, you know, why was Giovanni so obsessed with, you know, these corporations? You know, because he was a businessman too. But then you find out he wanted it for Mewtwo because that's what he needed the Master Ball for. But at the same time, though, you know, that's where they originally had Mewtwo. You know, because the Silph Code Chief and all that actually... And that's probably where the Master Ball originally came from, too. They created it so they could control Mewtwo, technically. But then it's like, if you think about it, you know, they also had, like, this boss rush at the end, and, like, Professor Oak was supposed to be there. And it kind of made sense because, you know, if you played in the original Pokemon games, you know, you got to really think, like, how did Professor Oak... How did we fight Professor Oak before? How was it that people were finding Professor Oak actually had Pokemon data in the final version? Like, it was in the game's coding, but you couldn't fight him, though. You know, I mean, without, like, hacking the game. So it's like, how does that work? And so there had to be a premise for it at one point. And eventually we found the map that it belonged to and the data. And so they were able to put it together and say, well, you know, maybe there was more to it than that. Maybe Professor Oak was supposed to be the final boss of Gen 1, and... You know, because it made sense. You know, he was a Pokemon researcher. He was, and even according to, like, Agatha, for example, the one that was in the Elite Four, stated that, you know, she used to be rivals with him. Used to be really good. And Agatha was pretty damn good herself because she was in the Elite Four, you know, way stronger than most trainers. There was only a few trainers in there that I could even think that even came close to beating her. Was like, you had Lance, you had Professor Oak, you had the trainer you played as, again, Red, and you had Blue or Green, depending on what you want to call them. There were only very few trainers that even came close to being able to beat Agatha. Granted, her position in the Elite Four because she was the third trainer you fought after you fought Lorelei and Bruno, and then finally Lance after her. So it's actually really interesting to think, you know, how different the series could have been, even just playing certain things out of order. But most of the characters and concepts really did remain the same, the ones they still voted on. But it's really crazy to think that even the Elite Four itself had, like, there were 2 leagues you had to go through, 2 victory roads. You had you had Victory Road itself. Then you went to the Elite Four, could buy items, heal. And as soon as you go in there, you had to cross through the Elite Four itself, which there was like a bunch of reoccurring floors with even more wild trainers you had to fight. And then you had to fight, and then you finally got to the Elite Four. You could fight them, finally. And then later on, there was a boss rush where you could fight basically the gym leaders again, but from start to finish. And they all had stronger versions of their Pokemon before, except for Erica. I'm not really sure what Erica's Pokemon would have been, because for some strange reason, you couldn't fight her. And again, Professor Oak was at the end. That's where you caught Mewtwo. But it's funny, though, to think that, like, a lot of these prototype maps could have been in the final version. And if they wouldn't have ran out of cartridge space, how much longer these games could have been would have been more interesting, you know? But at the same time, though, and then you go to fast forward to Gen 2, and even if you wanted to play, like, Pokemon, the 1997 Space World demo, they had, like, the same kind of concept, sort of. You could have rematches with the gym leaders after you beat the Elite Four, and then you had to beat the Elite Four again to respawn that. But it was like, you know, you would go through the victory... If you remember the victory road that we went through in the final version of Fire Red and Leaf Green, or not Fire Red and Leaf Green, Gold and Silver and Crystal, that was actually the same victory road that was actually used in the Kanto Victory Road. Not, I mean, in the final version of Gen 2. It was still leaked to that. But that Victory Road, believe it or not, wasn't the only Victory Road. There was actually another Victory Road you go through, and you had to fight through so many trainers to get to it. It was like the Mount Fuji, where the Indigo Plateau originally resided in the Space World 1997 demo. And then you had, like, you know, and it's funny because, like, they even had, like, certain Pokemon, and certain people were asking questions, like, you know, why was Lance, like had, like, certain Pokemon, like certain Dragonites that were under-leveled, and then you find out he was actually supposed to be, like, in the 60s the next time you fight him. And it's just interesting to think about how certain Pokemon were a lot stronger than they originally were, and because they moved things around. You know, you weren't supposed to go to the Kanto region right away, because the Kanto region wasn't really what the final version of Pokemon was. But once, like, they wrote that compression algorithm, thanks to Satoru Iwata, before he passed away, way back in the day, before he became the president of Nintendo of Japan, you know, because he was the president of HAL, the same company that made Super Smash Bros. And I think other ones too. And Kirby. Yeah, definitely Kirby. Another great series if you never played it. It's actually really interesting how they wrote that, especially the music. But anyways, it's like, you really see, like, how important it is to really kind of find this information, especially for something like Pokemon, because you never really know, like, what's out there, how much different the series was, and what could be even more compelling to really compare it to something else, especially the final versions. Because even though most ideas were used, you really can see, like, how different the series really would have been. Like, some of the interesting concepts they could have been. Like, it kind of makes sense, because I've always wondered why, like, you go through, like, Victory Road is another challenge. And then, like, you can really see they didn't really stay too far away from that. Like, you know, you go to Victory Road, you fight a bunch of trainers that are probably just as good as you, but, you know, obviously you're better. And then you find out, then you finally get to the Elite Four, and then you fight the Elite Four themselves before you finally figure out who's the very last trainer in this game before, you know, you just, you know, outranked every single one of them. And then you can, of course, go back and complete the Pokedex and all the other side quests that are in those games. But it's like, you know, as a series, it really did work. You know, there's a reason why a lot of people love the series that they grew up with, or they just got into it so easily. It like, for the series that it worked as, it was probably the most complex series Nintendo ever made. And with that, it still has, even to this day, like, some of the most complex answers that we still have no understanding of, because either we don't have the information to go off of, or we don't know, like, what to really look for, where to look for it at. You know, because if a lot of this data is still, like, in some of these games, then you're going to need somebody who's, like, pretty good at data mining and knowing how to make sense of stuff like this, because that's beyond my understanding right now. If I can find this information and anybody has it, will send it to me, I mean, please, I will make videos about it. But again, if anybody can find the index numbers 192 and all the way out till, like, 299 of Gen 1, that'd be nice. As well as Gen 2 and just any other Pokemon that we haven't seen before. If you can find that much information, then believe me, I will give you credit for it, and I'll also give you, I mean, not only that, but it's just, you know, I'll give you a shout out too, because we need this information. But again, if I find anything else, I'll make a video about it. But this should kind of give you an understanding of why I make these kind of videos, the kind of information that comes out, like how we should weigh into it, and what to really look for. Because here's the thing, people, you know, when you're dealing with prototype data, and especially with the ROM hacks people make, I mean, just because people make ROM hacks about certain things doesn't necessarily mean they're all fake. There very well could be, somebody could find prototype data, and as long as they can prove that it makes sense, like compared to, like, how the game's changed, then there's every reason to still consider it. Like, I mean, even the game designers themselves confirmed that, yeah, there were a lot of ideas that Gen 1 and 2 had, but due to cartridge limitations, they completely had to, like, rework around it a little bit. Like, I made a couple videos explaining this one earlier, but, like, originally Giovanni wasn't Giovanni. He was actually just a normal trainer at the Gen 1, but then, you know, you take Giovanni out of the equation, and now it's like, well, wait a minute, you know, who's the leader of Team Rocket, and who's the main villain then, you know, like, how does it work? Does it still flow the same way, or are we looking at a completely different, like, parallel universe of pocket monsters? It's actually pretty interesting to think about. How much different. See, you start changing one thing in the equation, especially a very important variable, and now you got different results, huge results. So that's probably why they scrapped that idea. They probably figured, hey, wait a minute, we could turn this guy into the main villain and give him this wicked backstory. See, that was what was really cool about Giovanni's story. Giovanni was originally supposed to be the first gym leader in Viridian City. However, though, they took the original gym leader of that gym, they closed the gym, did 180 on the whole thing, gave him a complete restoration, gave him a different character, gave him a different role, made him the main villain, and then one of the side, characteristics Giovanni played is he was the gym leader. So they still used that idea, but they turned it into something else. You just came back and fought Giovanni in the Viridian City gym as the 8th gym leader instead of the 1st. Kind of interesting how they managed to take a better plot twist and put it into the games. You think you're done with Team Rocket? No. Now you got to fight Giovanni again, but as a gym leader instead. And how he talked about how he'd have his revenge because you were actually supposed to fight him again in the Silk Tower, where the boss league was. He wasn't even nobody even knew that Giovanni was even supposed to be there. But originally he was like a flying gym leader, and he had like the legendary birds. And I actually found this one out a while ago. You were actually, like, as far as Zapdos, Moltres, and Articuno go, I'm not sure about Mewtwo and Mew, because, I mean, Mew was created, so there was only one Mewtwo. But as far as we're concerned, though, that the legendary birds, though, they were supposed to be, like, multiple legendary birds you could catch. And they could be caught on different floors. But this was before they probably figured, well, we'll make the legendary birds, like, you can only catch one of each of them per playthrough. And they made them like stationary legendaries. So, like, obviously, like, you go to the Seafoam Islands, where Articuno is. But Articuno was actually another floor down. And Moltres was moved. Aside from, like, the locations being a little bit different, too. But, once you found the legendary birds you were looking for, you were in for a challenge. Because they had low catch rates. They weren't easy to catch. And when you finally did catch them, I mean, you had possibly a very powerful Pokemon that, if used correctly, could definitely give you a huge field advantage in the game. So that was actually very interesting how that worked. And it made you wonder, how that, like, even Giovanni was using those Pokemon, but it was like, maybe you could catch more than one of them, but they would still be a pain in the ass because they weren't necessarily supposed to be on level 50, but if you, with the right requirements met, you probably go to the Seafoam Islands, you could possibly catch like multiple Articunos and all that. And I'm just trying to think how that would have worked, but maybe that was before they figured out what they wanted to do with the legendary birds. They were rare, but they were also like very hard to find. Just like Arcanine was originally supposed to be a legendary Pokemon, but was it supposed to be like a legendary, like you only could catch one per playthrough or something like that? Very interesting how they changed a lot of concepts. It does really make you wonder how the series would have been different. Still reminds me of a lot of scrapped ideas. Heck, even the anime, despite, what people say about it, there were still a few episodes where they kind of took a lot of scrapped ideas at that time before they changed everything. And it really does make you wonder, like, how different, like, again, yeah, the anime is different compared to the games, but, but there were some ideas that they had at that time that were scrapped from the games that were kind of like making a cameo into the anime, and they just so left it in there that we were able to say, wait a minute, that actually was supposed to be an idea in the games at one point. But they changed it. Like, Arcanine was a real legendary Pokemon, and, Ash saw Ho-Oh in the first episode, but that was before they were hinting that there's more Pokemon out there that we have no understanding of yet. It was supposed to be like, there's more to come, basically. So that's what they kind of left it on a cliffhanger, Not to mention, how they wrote the anime, with the movies and all that. They were always, like, supposed to be, like, they extended the lore of, like, said characters. That's kind of why a lot of people love Pokemon. You know, they took the they took the lore, they extended it very well, and at the same time, though, there's probably some things they could have done better, but, you know, that's what they did, though. It was like adventure. You're trying to find stuff, you're trying to find the answers, and it's, like, relatable in real life. You know, you're trying to find the answers to this, find the answers to that, and, you know, what do we do, right? So, like I said, you know, I think I'll honor Satoshi Tajiri's wishes by, like, you know, if we can find this information, just talk about it, you know, so that way we can see, like, just how many ideas we really have to go through before we really truly understand it for what it really was. So I'll end it right there. Again, if we find any new ideas, again, we'll just make videos about it. It's really all we can do. Or maybe even make ROM hacks about it too. That'd be pretty cool. But again, yeah, subscribe if you haven't already. This channel is almost to 1,000 subscribers. I'm basically just trying to keep this trilogy alive, even though there's tons of people that will keep it alive. Maybe it gives me something to talk about, and yeah, if anybody has any like theories you want me to investigate, you know, I'll be glad to take a look at it. But it's got to be, but right now we're digging through prototype data, so it's got to be stuff that kind of makes sense, not just fan-made stuff, you know. If anybody has any ideas, I'll take a look at it, but right now let's kind of let's try to figure out what's in the real games, though, the final version of the games, and try to compare it to what they originally had. So, yeah, again, hope you have a good day, and I'm out.